Good morning. Welcome to the HOC Development and Finance Committee meeting for October 27th, 2023. I am Commissioner Jeff Merkowitz. To my left is Commissioner Rick Nelson, and to my right is Commissioner Robin Solomon. The first item on our agenda is the minutes of the prior meeting from September 22nd. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
The motion having been properly moved and seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries unanimously. We will now turn to the remaining items on our agenda. I think we have rearranged the order a little bit, and so we will begin with a discussion of our Hillendale project. I will introduce first President of the HOC, Chelsea Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the HLC public, and the HLC team. I want to provide a little context in regards to the Hillendale project and where we are at this point. The board well knows the history of this project, but to put in perspective on where we are today, I'd like to provide a few reminders. This development started as a public housing project, Holly Hall, with 96 units for elderly and non-elderly disabled residents. It consisted of 3 4-story garden apartments on approximately 4.5 acres of land located in the northwest quadrant of the New Hampshire Avenue interchange with Interstate 495. After reaching its full lifespan in 2018, we transitioned the development through RAD and moved residents to various developments across the county, Victory Crossing, Aspen Hill, etc. And on October 2015, now 8 years ago, the commission approved the first pre-development budget for our new Hillendale Gateway, which will produce 463 units, both senior and multifamily, retail, multiple amenities for residents and the community. In addition to the many environmental sustainability features that the board has heard about and the public is well aware of, and we are all proud of, Hillendale Gateway will bring worthy new amenities and improvements to this neighborhood and Eastern Montgomery County. It's intended to be a catalyst for achieving broader transformations of the Hillendale area. It will attract new restaurants, new shops, residents, businesses, jobs, etc. to the White Oak area. We have already seen this vision come to reality, as we've heard most recently that WRG will plan extensive retail around our new site. The development, the board and the staff have had to accommodate and maneuver through many modifications and obstacles over the last 8 years. The board revisited the affordability mix and asked for more affordability, and the staff delivered. Subsequently, the project has had to weather a pandemic and the resulting economic turbulence, resulting in an over $40 million increase in costs and the most difficult economic environment we've all experienced in years, with interest rates at its highest and banks approaching investments more conservatively than ever. As you know, the staff has had to reinvent this project with a complete change in building structure from precedent, which was steel, to concrete, to accommodate supply shortages and inflation. An early start was initiated by the team to avoid losing additional time and expense, and a comprehensive development plan was presented and adopted by the board last month. In today's presentation, the team is delivering a sound finance structure to move our development forward while maintaining the affordability that we have committed to this project. I'd like to introduce you to our mortgage finance team, who will present this financing plan to you, led by Monty Stanford, the Director of Mortgage Finance.
Thank you, Executive Director Andrews, and good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Monty Stanford, Director of Mortgage Finance. And today we are excited to present for the Commission's approval our financing plans for Hillendale Gateway. Construction of Hillendale Gateway development, as was stated by our former Executive Director, a former public housing community on New Hampshire Avenue will include 463 rental units of affordable housing contained in 2 buildings. Between each building will be 2 retail pads and a 634-unit parking structure. The project is strategically located in Silver Spring in the southeast part of Montgomery County. Much of the apparent complexity associated with the Hillendale transaction may stem from the fact that it actually represents 2 components that are familiar financing structures for HOC. The first component is the age-restricted, or AR, as it will be referred to in this presentation. This component is very similar to a typical tax credit transaction, such as the recently completed residences on the lane. And it's typical in the following ways. Residences is a 150-unit senior affordable housing project. Like in Hillendale, Residences on the Lane also use a private construction lender with a permanent loan takeout, M&T Bank. Residences also had Wells Fargo as a tax credit investor. So the only unique novel source for the AR source is the green financing that will be discussed in more detail later. The second component of Hillendale is the non-age restricted, or NAR, is HOC's typical mixed income development. The NAR is very similar to the 305-unit Alexander House. It also had a Citibank as a private construction lender and HOC risk share facility as the permanent loan takeout. And Alexander House was also divided into a market rate and an affordable / tax credit rental condominium. The NAR affordable tax credit condominium also uses all the same financing sources as the age restricted. So given that these are HOC's typical transaction types with construction fully funded, the core decision points of this particular transaction are confined to the permanent phase of financing. And as with most of our new construction transactions, staff will return to the commission closer to the Hillendale conversion date. And closing is expected to occur in December 2023 with the conversion to permanent debt in December 2027. So what are the core decision points? The first decision point is related to the use of HOC's real estate line of credit to bridge the timing of the receipt of the low-income housing tax credit equity, as well as the receipt in some small amounts of the receipt of green financing and other permanent financing sources. The second decision point is related to a potential need for additional capital at permanent conversion. Both decision points will be addressed later in this presentation, as my colleague Victoria Dixon will, for clarity's sake, first provide the commissioners with an overview of the NAR development section of the presentation, followed by a similar overview for the AR building. In order to execute the development plan approved by the commission in September of 2023, Mortgage Finance proposes the following financing plans for the commission's approval of fixed and variable, tax-exempt and taxable loans to fund acquisition, construction, and equipping of the development from the issuance of bonds under the 1996 indenture for the NAR building and as a standalone transaction for the AR building. A loan to bridge receipt of permanent financing proceeds, subordinate loans from HOC, subordinate loans from Montgomery County, and deferred developer fees. The development is also expected to be awarded allocations of 4% tax credits in December. Now, I will turn it over to Victoria Dixon, who will guide the commission through our request for the approval of the financing plan for Hillendale Gateway.
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Victoria Dixon, the Senior Multifamily Underwriter for Mortgage Finance, here to request approval of the financing plans for Hillendale Gateway with the additional applicable actions. The proposed development in Silver Spring on page 51 of the package will be a mixed-use, mixed-income, multi-generational community with leading sustainability and resilient features for the Mid-Atlantic region. The finance plan addresses construction and permanent financing of the age and income restricted building of 115 units, later referred to as AR, and a 308 unit non-age restricted building, NAR for short, which comprises both a LIHTC piece of 93 units as well as a market or unrestricted piece of 215 units, with the garage and approximately 1,300 square feet of retail. On the next page is a summary of the financing structures for both buildings during construction, using loans from private banks of Citibank and Wells Fargo, with HOC as conduit lender. However, the private banks will require HOC to provide a guarantee, including 25% repayment during construction. Previously, Citibank for the entire transaction was presented in the development plan. However, Wells Fargo is being hereby recommended as construction lender of the AR building. The commission previously approved the use of the PNC reloc to fund a bridge loan of up to $43 million for the combined transaction to be repaid from LIHTC equity proceeds, which will be recognized on a revolving basis to also include other permanent sources. For the transaction, we asked to increase the OHRF contribution to fund up to a combined $25 million, which represents a $14 million increase to be repaid from other future sources, including receipt of energy sustainability rebates and/or grants. Staff continues to work to secure additional county and state funding to reduce HOC's capital commitments to this transaction. Use of the county's Housing Production Fund occurs during construction of the NAR market piece, for repayment of which staff will return with a request of mezzanine financing. On page 60, you can see the affordability mix of the transaction meets the needs of the community to provide significant public purpose, supporting the allocation of available volume cap. The income averaging at the NAR building allows the property to provide 20% of units to households earning at or below 50% of area median income, while the AR building provides 40% at or below 60% of AMI. Moving to page 55, we have an, yes. To page 60. So I don't believe that's page 60. It's slide 12. There you go.
Just on the it's 100% income restricted, and overall 54% of income is subject to.
For the presentation, can you show the entirety of the slide? There you go. That overall is a statement in regards to the entirety of the development, not specific to AR building. Okay, any other questions at this point? Okay. All right, so moving to page 55. Slide 7. Okay. Here on page 55, we have an overview of the transaction highlights for the NAR building, where financing contemplates approval of a private construction loan from Citibank to comprise both taxable and tax-exempt portions, which will later be converted into a permanent loan from HOC insured with FHA risk share and subject to balloon up to 25 years. The taxable portion of the $30 million is associated with the NAR LIHTC condominium to match with the amount of tax-exempt fixed-rate long-term bonds being issued in December under the 1996 indenture, which proceeds will be used as cash collateral for the bonds until used to repay the construction loan at conversion to the permanent mortgage. This is similar to the structure in use at other transactions of the commission. In addition, the other tax-exempt portion of up to $150 million will represent the combined NAR building for need on the LIHTC to meet the 50% test and achievable short-term and long-term governmental indebtedness achievable on the market side of the NAR building. The construction loan associated with the market side will be repaid from proceeds of the future issuance of long-term tax-exempt variable rate governmental bonds under the 1996 indenture into the combined NAR building risk share loan in 2027, which is similar to the financing on residences up the lane. Closer to that time, staff will return to the commission for approval of the bond resolution for the variable governmental bonds. The transaction contemplates execution of interest rate hedges to manage variable rate risk of the associated construction bridge and permanent loans. On page 61 is a presentation of the expected operations for the NAR building, components, and basic assumptions. Note that the initial replacement reserves will be established at $250 per unit upfront from capital sources, and the stabilized property will begin annual contributions at $250 per unit. Based on the current 20-year swap rate estimated at 4.85% all in, without the cushion and subject to interest rate movements, staff anticipates the NAR market would support a loan of approximately $100.5 million and the NAR LIHTC to support approximately $23.5 million with a debt service coverage of 1.15 times. Moving to page 64.
Before you do,
Mhm.
I just want to make sure I understand how some of the numbers are developed.
Commissioner Markowitz, let's make sure you're not muted.
I
right.
just, yeah, I
Perfect.
was the last time. I
Okay.
think I got it on this time. Thank you, though. So on the net rental income for the market, NAR market, it's per unit 40,985. And just if I do the math, that's 3,415 per month.
Inclusive of the retail and garage income.
So that I was okay. So maybe it's the garage income that's missing, because I was thinking I saw that the retail represents less than 5% of the revenue. And back on the previous page, the market rate units were listed as 2,323. And so is the difference there all retail and garage?
I can go back and double check the breakdown, but that would be the approximate. Yeah.
Okay. Because it's about a 50%, almost 50% difference.
I'll go back and double check and we can add more language to that in the package that goes before the commission.
Okay. And there's a little bit of difference with the AR as well, but so I figured there was other sources of income, rental income. I just wanted to clarify what those were.
Okay.
So
I wanted to ask you about the developer fee, unless you're going to deal with that later.
Just to include all that rental income in the pro forma, I thought we had a practice of not putting all of that income in there because of the fragility of the retail market.
I mean, we made a good assumption for vacancy, but I'm not familiar with not underwriting the potential income of the property.
Well, somebody in the room might be familiar. I mean, I'm just asking the question because I remember having discussions. I thought I remember the bank saying that they didn't want us to include the full amount of anticipated retail because it was skewing it. And if I'm wrong, but I'd just like a little history on that, if somebody in the room can provide it.
I'm not familiar.
We'll look into it and get back to you.
Could I ask you about the developer fee?
What?
Or you're going to do it later? I'm sorry.
Okay, if I can, one more
No, go
question.
ahead.
Replacement fee of 250, the replacement reserve of 250.
Mhm.
Is that what we've been using traditionally on our new developments? Or was it higher?
It depends on the transaction. But a $250 per unit upfront for a new construction where the systems are brand new and should require minimal maintenance is a standard in the industry. And we have used lower initial contributions on some deals.
Can we use higher?
We have used higher. Traditionally, that's for an existing building with older systems.
I thought we had higher on some newer buildings.
There's some project we dealt with recently that was 350. I
Yeah.
want to say that was new construction,
mean,
but I don't remember.
This question comes up every time we have a new development, and it seems like there's a different answer every time. I know you've got to run the numbers and make the numbers work, but the replacement reserves, and it's a point I've made before, is of interest to me only because down the road, we're always hit with, we don't have the money to do what we need to do because we don't have enough in the reserves and we got to go tap this fund or we got to finance. So the question I have raised consistently is, what do we really need to have in the reserves so that we can in fact foresaw and forego some of those problems? And we seem to not have any policy in terms of what we want. And if we're building new stuff, I'm not sure why we would have 2 or 3 different per unit reserve, replacement reserve numbers. A new building's a new building. A rehab building, I understand is different too. But my guess is it's more of an issue of how you can make the numbers work. And I guess,
Good morning, for the record, I'm Katie Brown, Advocacy Director. I do understand your comments and we've gone back and forth with regard to this issue. For this transaction, the primary goal was to ensure that we are able to raise enough debt to fund the transaction. We've also discussed a number of ways to adequately fund the replacement reserve accounts, and we can certainly go back and look at the possibility of funding a little bit more upfront. We also are discussing actively increasing the amount of the deposit in a few years. So that's something to consider as well. Notwithstanding your comment on what the policy should be, I think on a transaction by transaction basis, it demands different solutions, but it's certainly a point well taken, and we'll go back to the drawing board on this particular transaction and figure out if there are other ways to perhaps fund more in the later years as the project becomes a little bit more seasoned, and also the possibility of adding more upfront. Of course, that will cause additional investments from HOC perhaps and other sources, but we'll certainly look into that.
In terms of sizing debt, it's usually if you can keep it lower in the annual and more upfront,
Right.
your debt doesn't get as messed up. Of course, it is a use of funds that you'd have to budget for. We did some project just recently. Maybe my first meeting, I think that was at 350. That was new construction per unit. I don't remember which one, but it was my first meeting. I barely remember the meeting.
Yes, the other point of consideration I would just indicate is that this is what is industry standard in terms of FHA requirement. And when we can go above, we definitely do. As you can tell, as I gave in the preamble, there's been a lot of moving pieces in terms of trying to get this transaction to the finish line. When we are in a posture when we can go above what's industry standard, that is what our recommendation is to the board. We, of course, never recommend anything below what is either industry standard or acceptable from our lenders and FHA, et cetera. And in terms of the upfront versus annual, Commissioner Solomon, you raised that in one of our prior meetings. You'll notice that there's now a combination model that's been presented, taking that recommendation into consideration. And so we're always thinking about how we will sustain. But at this juncture, we're trying to make sure that this deal is able to continue to move forward.
Rick, if you're concerned, we could at a later time, but I've done things where, year 5, you go from 250 to 350, or numbers like that. If you wanted to memorialize that in some fashion after discussing with staff.
well, I am concerned. I'm also concerned the fact that I raise it every time we have a development, and my concerns aren't considered. Next point, go ahead.
You done. I wanted to ask about the developer fee part of this, for my own edification. Is it paid pari passu between the parties, or is?
It is up to a certain point. I do have slides regarding
we
each
can do it
building
later.
that represents what the split is of the developer fee. So we can address it better with that in front of you when we
Sure.
get there.
And the guarantees, are you going to develop, are you going to detail that later?
There are slides in the package that go more fully into the requests of the lenders. I was not going to go into greater detail, apart from just, bringing to the attention of the commission as part of the asks, the recognition of the guarantees that we are being asked to enter into.
So I'm curious between the split in the developer fee between us and the developer and who's giving the guarantees, development guarantee and the operating guarantees to the equity. I'm just curious. We can do it now or at an appropriate time, whatever works for you.
We can come back to that
Okay.
at a later time. I want to make sure we fully address your question.
Okay. You want to write me a note or something or the commissioners, or how do you want to?
I guess what we need to do is go each transaction, the NAR versus the AR. And as she walks us through the NAR, then we can ask and answer questions related to that transaction, which is different than how we've structured the AR. And so as we walk through the NAR, let's go through the slides and then let's open for questions that you may have.
Okay. So then moving to page 64 is a representation of the sources and uses for the NAR market component from a permanent look. The requested OHRF allocation for this component is up to $6.8 million. Staff will return to the commission with a request for mezzanine financing to repay a portion of the Citibank construction loan at a later date. Moving to page, the next
Can I
page.
on that one? I thought earlier you said you wanted to use 14 million from the OHR.
That is a cumulative increase to the request of OHRF usage for the entirety of the Hillendale Gateway transaction.
Okay, and I would hope that the commission has provided a little bit of information in terms of the use of the OHRF. We've discussed that before also in terms of requiring an analysis of what is expected in terms of returns to the OHRF to be given to the commission, and I haven't seen that.
We do address, I believe, part of your question in the fiscal impacts section of the presentation.
I'm talking about the analysis, at least that I do, of looking to see what we have coming in the years going out and what we have
The more detailed.
anticipated in terms of use of it, to see whether, in fact, that is what we want to do with it and whether we have enough money to do it. Again, it's something I've raised before, but obviously it's not deemed to be important, and that's bothersome.
Commissioner Nelson, I look forward to us having some further discussion. I do believe we have that material available to you and can walk you through it so that you can feel as though your questions have been addressed. Thank you.
So moving to the next page, 65 represents the sources and uses for the NAR LIHTC component, which is projected to require tax exempt financing of approximately 26 million to meet the 50% test and qualify for the 4% tax credits. On the next page.
Just very quick question. In sub-bullet A, there references the appraisal value on an S stabilized unrestricted.
Yes.
But this is on the restricted portion, right?
Yes.
So is that typical that the appraisal is on an unrestricted basis, even though
We did obtain values for both. But we represent what the unrestricted value of the property should those fall away.
okay. Is the restricted value still above the loan amount?
I don't recall the exact dollar off the top of my head, but I believe so, and we'll add that information.
Okay. I mean, is what the lender looks at, the unrestricted amount or?
We do, yes. For risk share purposes, we look at the unrestricted value.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so moving then to page 66, we briefly show a combined sources and uses for the NAR building, which will be refinanced together into the permanent mortgage with HOC, credit enhanced by FHA risk share insurance. Then jumping to page 56, in regards to the AR building, its financing contemplates approval of a private taxable construction loan from Wells Fargo, which will later be converted into a tax exempt permanent loan from Citibank with a balloon up to 25 years and HOC as conduit for both. Entering into the permanent loan with Citibank will require execution of a forward locking agreement at closing in December, and execution of additional interest rate hedges to manage the risk of variable rate construction and bridge loans as contemplated. On page 62, we reflect the expected operations for the AR building. Based on the
1
20.
second for me, Victoria.
Yes,
I know that we have a couple of things going on, and I do want to make sure we pause. You started with the NAR, and I want to ensure that we answer all questions related to the NAR before we move to the AR. And Commissioner Solomon, I know you had some questions that might require a little musical chairs for our team, so that we can make sure that we answer them. So if we can pause and ask, are there, so that we can receive the questions related to the NAR that either are directed to Victoria and or our development team, I'd like an opportunity to make sure we have clarity there.
I'm just curious, in the split in the developer fee, cash and deferred, who's giving the guarantees at what point? Part of this is my own edification on how we do business here. But we can do this later. We can do it now, whatever works for you.
Okay. I believe it's on page 71 for the NAR, look at the transaction highlights.
Or if you want to do the combined, however you want to do it.
Sure. Good morning, commissioners. For the record, my name is Catherine Foster. I'm a housing acquisition manager in the real estate division. I can speak to how the developer's fee split for the entire transaction. So the entire transaction is subject to a 5% developer fee of all starting soft costs. That 5% fee is split 80% to our development partner, 28% to HOC. However, for the two LIHTC transaction, there's additional developer fee that can be earned, which is really the source of our deferred developer fee for those two transactions. So it's in total, the developer fee with that excess sort of extra LIHTC developer fee is closer to about 7% of the transaction. If that's answering your question. Oh, I'm so sorry.
When does it get paid at
So we do have an ongoing sort of developer fee that's paid on a monthly basis throughout construction. Yeah,
That's paid or just earned?
that's paid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is it split?
80-20.
80-20. And who gives what guarantees,
HOC is the sole guarantor.
including the development guarantee?
Yeah.
Okay, so you get 80% of the fee and give zero guarantee.
Correct.
Is that typical for us?
Yeah.
For the record, Zachary Marks, Chief Real Estate Officer. Yeah, so we have in more recent deals, what we've focused, so a couple of things I wanted to clarify. So one, on more recent deals, we have looked at completion guarantees coming from, just in terms of the actual physical completion of the project, coming from our development partners. So that's something that we've as President Andrews mentioned, this is a deal created 8 years ago. So in our more recent deals, so for instance, Residence on Lane, the Laureate building B, like all those, there is a completion guarantee that the developer takes. And then HOC takes more of the ongoing guarantees. In terms of the way the development fees flow, because there's this sort of conventional fee that's associated with the market rate, and then the two tax credit deals have fee that all comes to HOC. As you know, like tax credit deals pay out their fees in these like milestone chunks. And so it's not quite equivalent with the way that conventional fees work, which typically are paid somewhat upfront and then consistent with delivery of the building. So those things are kind of flowing at the same time, but because of the rules of the tax credit investor, the LIHTC fees are more like, airdrops over the course of 3 or 4 milestones. But that 100% belongs to us.
And so the amount paid at closing is 80/20, or they're just getting all of it in the beginning?
So they get 20. They're upfront. It's typically somewhere between 20 to 25% at close, and that's usually
Right.
just to cover their cost of doing
But it's
business.
split 80/20, or it's
Yeah, so
100% to them?
it's so even in pre-development, we've been receiving an 80/20 split of fee, which then gets applied to the total number. So all throughout the market rate fee, the conventional fee is being split 80/20. And then in terms of when that's paid, there's a portion paid at closing, at this financial closing, and then it's usually about 75 to 80% is held back and gets paid as construction progresses and the building is delivered.
So your current practices are that your development partner takes the development guarantee?
The completion guarantee, yes, correct.
Right.
Yeah, I just want to be,
Yeah, no, I get it.
that's what we asked them for. So I think we're saying the same thing though.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but yes, that's been an addition. We've also added things like a guarantee fee that HOC gets and other things. So we've certainly, as we've gained credibility, as we've gotten further into this experience of venturing on new construction deals, we've definitely continued to, try to improve.
And, and it's an unlimited guarantee development and completion guarantee. So they traditionally now take 100%, or we absorb some of that too.
No, so typically we are really the sort of operational guarantees. So in terms of like, as it relates to the lender, but in terms of the delivery of that building and where that building has to get UNO, and if it doesn't, that's on the developer. The developer takes that responsibility.
But in this one, his fee is there, is what it is.
Right.
Okay. And the rest of the guarantees are ours, recapture.
Correct.
And all that. Thank you.
And some of that comes from the fact that that's just who they're going to come after. I mean, they're not going to come after a sea of LLCs. They're going to come after the Housing Opportunities Commission. So
I get it. Thank you.
some of that's practical. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. There are no further questions on the NAR. Let's take a quick step back and start with the AR. Victoria, please.
Okay. So moving back to page 6, slide 8 for the AR building. Page 56, slide 8. Oh, the page has changed on me again. Okay. So, all right. Yes, that would be the page right there. Slide, yeah, page 56 then. Yeah. Okay. So this is the transaction highlights for the AR building that we previously were speaking to. It shows the developer fee broken down. And, an outline of the taxable and the tax exempt portions attributed for the age restricted building, which we will enter into a forward lock agreement with Citibank to be taken out into a permanent loan, and execution of interest rate hedges to manage the risk of the construction and bridge loans as contemplated. Then we went to page 62, I believe it is, that has the operations for the AR building. Yes. And here you will see, based on the 20-year swap estimated at 7.2% all in, Without the cushion and subject to interest rate movements, staff anticipates the building will support approximately $27.8 million at a debt service coverage of 1.15. I will speak to the replacement reserves on this transaction. We are underwriting again to the $250 per unit as required minimum by Citibank. And then moving to page 72, or I'm sorry, page 69 or 64, I'm sorry, 64. Yes, there. Represents the sources and uses for the AR building, which is projected to require approximately 43.5 million of tax exempt financing to meet the 50% test and qualify for 4% tax credits. On page 72 is an overview of the HOC's available volume cap to meet the needs for the Hillendale transaction. HOC made a request of CDA for additional volume cap and has received $30 million to date, with approximately 2.4 million pending. On the next page provides an overview of the bond authorizing resolutions that will be prepared by bond counsel to cover both the taxable and tax exempt fixed and variable indebtedness in one or more series for the buildings. These amounts are subject to interest rate movements and will be revisited in the package to the commission. As previously mentioned, in the future, staff will return to the commission for approval of the bond authorizing resolution to issue the $120 million of variable governmental bonds under the 1996 indenture. Moving to page 76. Closing of the subject transaction in fiscal year 2024 is expected to result in a decrease of $766,000 to the commission's fiscal income from reduced commitment and development fees. The request of funds from the OHRF represents $14.5 million increase contribution from funds to date towards the transaction. As of September 30th, there remained $4 million of unobligated funds available, with the expected return from multiple properties during the fiscal year to provide sufficient capacity for the request. These amounts are subject to change to accommodate changes in the sizing of the senior loans, given interest rate movements, and will be revisited in the package to the commission. Staff continues to work towards securing additional financing resources to reduce HOC's equity contribution to the transaction. And when fully drawn, the bridge loan will obligate $43 million of the commission's general obligation borrowing capacity. However, draws are not expected to commence until 2026, approximately 24 months from now, from closing. As of September 30th, the unobligated balance was 11.3 million, with repayment from multiple properties during the fiscal year to provide sufficient capacities for the request. Costs of issuance and other financing fees will be repaid from sources of the transaction. Therefore, on pages 77 and 78, staff recommends the Development and Finance Committee join in recommending the commission to approve of the following actions as noted for both the NAR and AR buildings respectively. First, we have the financing plans for the NAR buildings, the feasibility and public purpose for the buildings to allocate a combined $77 million of volume cap, executing the bond authorizer resolutions for tax exempt private activity bonds and standalone indebtedness, providing guarantees including 25% repayment for the construction loans, issuing of financing commitments for the buildings to provide FHA risk share mortgage insurance as credit enhancement, with HOC assuming 50% of the risk for the NAR building, entering into construction loans with Citibank and Wells Fargo for HOC to act as conduit lenders with the private lenders, entering into a forward lock agreement for the permanent loan with Citi, including balloon, as well as interest rate hedges for the other variable rate debt contemplated, increase the OHRF usage to the overall transaction by 14.2 million, and lastly, to negotiate, make, and accept other various financing sources to the transaction as contemplated. Are there any questions further?
Are there any additional questions from the committee? That's a healthy plenty. So, hearing no additional questions at this time, I will consider a motion to accept the staff's recommendation and forward the action to the full commission.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. The motion is approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, team.
At this time, we will, I guess, return to the beginning of our original agenda to discuss a couple of items regarding an architectural services pool and a finance development and finance consulting pool. I guess these are two separate items. So some procurement items.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We will start with our request for support in creating an architectural services pool. I'd like to turn it over to our real estate team led by Zachary Marks, and I believe we also have Paul online. We just need to show us. Thank you. Paul, you can get started. Thank you.
Good morning, commissioners, staff, and public. I'm Paul Benzigera, construction manager for HOC. We're here to seek approval to create a pool of architects and accessibility consultants pursuant to request for qualifications number 2383. Please go down. Can we move the slide down, please? Down, one more. Going down, please. Right, more, right there. Back up. The current architecture and accessibility consultant pool expired on October 15th. In accordance with HOC's procurement policy on June 13, 2023, request for qualifications for architectural services and accessibility consultant pool 2383 was issued with responses due July 26, 2023. We received 17 responses. Out of the 17 responses to the request qualifications, staff reviewed and evaluated proposals to make a recommendation for the selection of 14 architects to be included in the pool. Okay. Further, staff identified strength for each firm and created categories by building type, which is listed a few pages down. We'll get to that in a minute. Can we go down a little bit further, please? Right here is the scoring criteria. Sorry, back up. There you go. This is the qualification categories, how we scored each firm. Minority, female, disabled, schematic design, development, construction documents, and bidding. Down, please. One page. This is the proposed categories by specialty. We evaluated each response and created criteria for each architecture firm. They are new construction, low rise, mid rise, new construction, high rise, accessibility consultants, and then the architects will be qualified to do the renovations. Down one slide, please. Okay. Similar to the previous architectural pools engagement and consistent with past practices, staff will request pre-development funding at the appropriate time. That includes architectural services. Let's see. Prior architectural pools limited the scope of work to feasibility task. Request for qualification 2383 will allow staff to select one architect for the entire project with an annual cap of $2,500,000. If the architect's aggregate scope per transaction exceeds the executive director's $250,000 authorization limit, staff will return to the commission prior to awarding a contract Slide down a little bit, please. Okay, these are the pool soliciting protocol. This is what should be in the RFPs if an RFP is needed to be issued. New task requests with the items below, selection process, which basically is listed below. Go down one more page, please. Okay, summary and recommendations. Issues of consideration, does the Development Finance Committee join staff in recommending to the Commission approval to select the firms listed in the table below to create a pool of 14 architects and accessibility consultants? Approve the ability to retain an architect from this pool for all phases of a transaction under the same terms of the pool contract to maintain continuity and provide for more timely completion tasks. Also authorize the executive director to execute $0 contracts with each member of the pool for an annual aggregate cap of $2,500,000. If an architect's proposed aggregate scope per transaction exceeds the executive director's $250,000 authorization limit, staff must return to the commission for approval prior to awarding the contracts. Contracts will be issued for a period of 1 year from the date of contract award, with up to 4-year, 1-year renewals in accordance with the Commission's procurement policy. There is no direct impact on HOC's operating budget. Services will be sought on an as-needed transaction-specific basis and paid from respective real estate development budgets or other funds that have been approved by the Commission. Down a little bit, please. For discussion at the meeting of the Development Finance Committee, staff recommendation, and back up a tiny bit, please. There you go. This pool has been a critical part for real estate development divisions to staff high quality architects and accessibility consultants to development transactions. Staff asked that the Development Finance Committee join staff in recommending to the Commission approval to 1, select the following architectural firms to create a pool of 14 architects and accessibility consultants. Also approve the ability to retain an architect from this pool for all phases of a transaction under the same terms of the pool contract to maintain continuity and provide for a more timely completion of tasks. Authorize the executive director to execute $0 contracts with each member of the pool for an annual aggregate cap of $2,500,000. Okay. If an architect's proposed aggregate scope per transaction exceeds the executive director's $250,000 authorization limit, staff must return to the Commission for approval prior to awarding the contract. Contracts will be issued for a period of 1 year from the date of contract award, with up to 4 1-year renewals in accordance with the Commission procurement policy. Down one, please. Okay, that's completes my presentation today.
Thanks, Paul. Are there any questions from the committee?
Yeah, can you review for me the process? We've got 14 firms that we'll have on the list.
Yes, sir.
And when you've got a job coming up, how many do you have to go back to get a price from?
Well, if you select from the category that we created, so if it's a new high-rise construction, you'll select from those firms that are under new high-rise construction. If it's a mid-rise or low-rise new construction, you'll select from those firms listed under that category. Under accessibility consultants, you'll select from those 11 firms as listed their accessibility consultants. And then there's, I don't know how many firms are in the renovation side, but you would go out to all the firms in each category to get a price from them. So you don't have to go out to all 14 firms each time, just the firms that are listed under our categories.
I think you just answered the question. It goes to all the firms in that particular category in regards to the need for that particular resource for consulting service.
Right.
I think you, in the presentation to the full commission, you want to mention that.
Okay, yes, sir, I will. Thank you.
Just include that sort of a description of the process.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, we
thank
will.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Are there any additional questions? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to accept the staff's recommendation and forward the item to the full commission.
Move approval.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. The motion carries. Thank you. We have another procurement item. I will turn it over to President Andrews
Thank
to
you.
introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request to have the committee support to create our real estate development and financing consulting pool. And it will be introduced by our new staff member, Alex Lawrence, our housing acquisition manager.
Thank you, Executive Director. Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Alex Loren, Housing Acquisition Manager with the Real Estate Department. I'm here today to seek support of the Development and Finance Committee to obtain approval of the Commission to establish a pool of 22 firms to provide real estate development and finance services to the Commission. This pool of consultants will assist HOC staff in real estate development and finance activities to ensure that the Commission achieves its affordable housing goals. Briefly, let me provide some context. This pool represents the revitalization and strengthening of the pool established in 2018 and follows the issuance of RFQ number 2386 back in June of 2023. You can go to the next slide, please. RFQ 2386 had a great response with 23 firms responding or applying. An evaluation committee with representatives from the real estate development division, mortgage finance, and asset management was assembled to evaluate each of these applicants, which resulted in the recommended pool of 22 firms. Applicants from this pool may be engaged for pre-development work and approved for participation in future development projects through the normal committee and commissioner process, by which firms may compete for specific assignments, during which staff will evaluate each firm's suitability and proposed pricing. Services would be sought on an as-needed project-specific basis and paid for by the respective development budgets approved by the commission. Therefore, there is no expected financial impact on the agency's operating budget. The real estate division also carries in its annual budget sufficient funds to use the pool for feasibility analysis. In the next few slides are the highlights of the responses received, the list of respondents, and the minimum qualifications and evaluation criteria by which each respondent was judged, the latter of which I will briefly touch on. Next slide, please. Here's the list of respondents. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The evaluation of the responses weighed most heavily on the qualifications and experience categories of criteria, with 50% of the scoring attributed to qualifications and expertise of the firms and individuals responding, as well as the quality and quantity of relevant project expertise. The remaining criteria by which respondents were evaluated included minority, female, disabled participation, references, performance, and the location of the business. The next slide contains the list of recommended firms to be included in the pool. Next slide, please.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
Was there a minimum score that needed to be met, since not all made it through?
The RFQ did not specify a minimum score, so the evaluation process focused on respondents meeting minimum qualifications and then the qualifications and expertise.
Okay, so but I think so fewer are ending up in the pool than applied, right?
That's
so
correct.
What were the ones that did not meet?
They did not meet the minimum qualifications. They did not provide sufficient level of expertise and qualifications.
Okay, but we had a score, but we were not requiring a minimum score. I'm a little confused.
For the record, Zachary Marks, Chief Real Estate Officer. Yeah, typically when we go with pools, it's more of a pre-qualification approach. So it's really just trying to make sure we have folks in the pool that can reasonably carry out the tasks. So we don't typically set a floor. And so the firm that didn't make it in this case, was more of a completion material. There weren't enough materials to really even determine whether the firm had, the qualifications to do this. So with pools, we try to err on the side of of a lot of participation, particularly since experience tends to ding the newer firms, the smaller firms, the minority female and disabled firms. So with pools, we tend not to set a lower threshold.
But to answer your question in terms of therefore, how can someone not get included? There are qualifications. So if it's not about the scoring, if one of the qualifications was 5 years of experience or providing a complete packet or other insurance requirements, if you did not demonstrate that you had those qualifications, you might not be eligible. But in terms of a minimum score for the evaluation process, there was no threshold there.
No, and I can appreciate that. I'm just curious, like, if we go back a slide and it shows, the scoring matrix there, why are we bothering to, provide point values? If all we're looking at is a minimum qualification.
Yeah, and I think some of that is trying to reconcile the nature of governmental procurement with, what we're trying to do here, which is really engender participation. So, I mean, we could certainly, it's something that we can do if it, we can, something we can do in the future is pick kind of a lower bound, but in general, we just, because this is a pre-qualification, nobody's getting assigned a project out of this. This is
Right.
really just trying to get folks in the door that we believe could serve the commission.
But do the points get used at all?
Not really.
Okay, just seems like, I don't know if it's additional work or what it is, if this can be streamlined or.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great for pools in particular to just
Yeah.
simply have a minimum threshold and move on.
Yeah.
And I would also say this is, I think, the 4th time we're doing this pool. So it's really it's the way this pool's been done every time since 2014, I think. So 3rd time, 4th time.
We'll revisit with our procurement office. We don't have our procurement officer in the room with us today, but this is a great question in terms of this particular pool and the structure. So we'll circle back. Thank you.
Sure.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, just not really a question, just a comment. For you to consider in future packets, something I've always wondered about. You always say these things have no budget impact. I mean, it's hard for me to understand how we can spend so much money and have no budget impact. That's a misnomer to describe it that way. I would suggest that the statement could be made that it doesn't require a change to the existing budget, doesn't require an increase to it's consistent with the existing budget. But to say that you're going to spend millions of dollars and it has no budget impact, it's just doesn't make much sense, just from a budget standpoint.
Yeah, the next thing we're talking about is $750,000, but it has no budget impact.
Yeah, I mean that, and I'm not suggesting that.
No impact on the approved budget.
That's the point that I think the language is intended to convey.
Yeah.
But when it's read, and it always bothers me when I see that statement, particularly coming from the Budget and Finance Committee. I think about that.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption, but
no problem.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. In summary, HOC's real estate development pipeline produces several acquisition, renovation, and new construction transactions per year. This pool acts as an important complement to existing real estate development staff. Staff asks that the Development and Finance Committee join in recommending to the Commission approval for the formation of a pool of development and finance consultants consisting of 22 firms selected from the respondents to RFQ number 2386. At this time, I'll take any questions. Any more questions?
Are there any additional questions? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to accept the staff's recommendation and forward the item to consideration by the full board.
Motion.
Second.
Motion has been properly moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion is approved. Thank you, Alex, and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be tougher on you next time.
I'm up again.
Our next item, another procurement item. And I will turn it over to President Andrews to introduce.
Thank you. Commissioners, as you know, we are, the staff is working on a comprehensive scatter site plan that will be presented to the board later this year. However, we do receive funding from the county as it pertains to ensuring that we are maintaining our current scattered site properties, especially those in need of serious capital repair. We receive close to 1.2 million, and then there's some rollover, carryover that happens every year. And we want to show and demonstrate that we are utilizing those resources. We've recently brought on a project manager that has been taking on the task of really mapping out capital needs for each of our different scattered site properties. This recommendation that's coming before you is a recommendation in regards to bringing on a contractor to address the capital needs at approximately 10 scattered sites. And I will turn it back over to Zachary Marks and Paul Vinciguerra to provide more details.
Paul, do you want to proceed?
Yes, sir. Sorry. Good afternoon. Good morning. Approval. We're here tonight for approval to select and execute a contract with Community Investments and Remodelers Incorporated for scatter site renovations pursuant to invitation for bid 2424. The 10 units selected for this solicitation have not had significant updates or on-and-go renovation since acquisition. In accordance with HOC's current procurement policy, on September 13th, 2023, invitation for bid 2424 was issued for scatter site unit renovations at HOC properties within Montgomery County, Maryland, with response due on October 13th. HOC receives $1,250,000 annually from the County Capital Improvement Program, CIP, as supplemental funds for deeply subsidized HOC and affiliate-owned unit improvements. CIP funds are being used to focus on repairs and renovations of the scatter site units where renovations are required and the properties cannot support additional debt. In addition to the $1,250,000 received for fiscal year 24, HOC has funding carried over from prior fiscal years that is available for renovations of scatter site units. Can you go down one, please? Okay, we are performing interior renovations such as kitchen remodeling, including new cabinets, countertops, energy efficient appliances. We're doing full bathroom remodeling, including tile, tub, shower surrounds, new vanity, toilet, and fixtures, as well as mold remediation as needed. Updated flooring to include luxury vinyl tile throughout the home, ceramic tile in bathrooms and carpeting in bedrooms and staircases. Drywall, carpentry repairs, and new paint throughout our unit. Replacement of HVAC, water heater, sump pumps, washer dryers. Updated electrical, mechanical, and plumbing to meet code requirements. Down a little bit, please. We're also performing exterior renovations, which will include replacement not on every unit, but as needed, replacement of windows, doors, siding, roofs, gutters, exterior carpentry and painting, concrete steps, sidewalks, driveways, decks, and fencing. Landscaping, tree removal, and site grading. Some work may require permits to be pulled by the contractor or subcontractor. Down, please. Here we have some pictures of previous renovations, just to show you the quality of the work that we're doing to our scatter site renovations. Keep going down, please. Okay. The HOC procurement policy states that staff must select the lowest qualified, responsible, and responsive bid. For our invitation for bid, the minimum qualifications included minimum 5 years experience with completing renovations in similar scope, size, and scale, All contractors must be properly licensed in the state of Maryland. Insurance coverage must meet HOC's requirements. Payment and performance bonding capacity to cover 100% of the renovation cost. We received five bids total, 4 qualified bids. The 4 qualified bids are listed below. The lowest being community investment and remodelers at $1,400,000. The highest being colossal contractors at $1,924,000. Then we had 2 bids in between. Staff proposes the selection of Community Investment and Remodelers Incorporated to award the contract for renovation of the 10 scatter site units. Community Investment and Remodelers Incorporated submitted the lowest bid and is a certified minority female disabled contractor. Next slide down, please. Okay, thank you. Summary of recommendation issues for consideration. Will the Development Finance Committee join staff's recommendation to the Commission to approve the selection of Community Investments and Remodelers Incorporated as the general contractor for the renovation of 10 scatter site units pursuant to IFB 2424, and then authorize the executive director to negotiate and execute a contract with Community Investments and Remodelers Incorporated for $1,400,000. So this is basically, there's no direct impact on HOC operating budget. The funding will come from the county capital improvement project funding for deeply subsidized units, which has already been approved by the Commission. Timeframe, we'll be taking it to, if we get approval today, we'll be taking it to the next Commission meeting. Staff recommendations. Staff recommends that Development Finance Committee join its recommendation to the Commission to select Community Investment and Remodelers Incorporated as the general contractor for the renovation of 10 scatter site units pursuant to IFB 2024, and authorize the executive director to negotiate, execute a contract with Community Investment and Remodelers Incorporated for $1,400,000. I think that's the last page, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any questions?
Yeah.
Great.
What was our prior experience in terms of per unit cost for these renovations?
The last time we did one was interior only. We're around $100,000 per unit, 95 to 100,000. Now you see the prices that we received for this procurement.
And
I'm sorry, sir.
go ahead.
I was just saying, we're doing a larger scope on these. We're doing interior and exterior renovations. And a lot of our scatter sites over the years have negative drainage. So we're really paying attention to the exterior with getting the grades back up where they need to be, so the water will drain off instead of possibly leaking into the unit we had issues with recently. So
do we have any idea why there's such a variation in terms of the prices offered by the 4 firms? Or
no, I don't have any idea. I can just speculate that some firms have a higher overhead than others. Some firms are larger than some. I mean, this firm, I've verified their credentials. They've worked in the city of Rockville before. He seems to be a good contractor at a fair price. Unfortunately, construction costs have just gone up recently since post pandemic. So
okay.
I mean, we were hoping for lower bids. I was estimating about 120 a unit. These are roughly 140 a unit. So
yes, I know.
Okay.
Are there any additional questions? If not, I will accept a motion to support the staff's recommendation and forward the item to the full board for consideration.
So second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. The motion carries. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
And our next item is having to do with our Metro Point property in Wheaton. I will turn it over to President Andrews.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Commissioners, this matter is related to an obligation that we have to Bozzuto in regards to their development fee. As you all may recall, we were before the board last month in regards to repositioning this asset. This is an obligation that we have to close out our relationship with Bozzuto related to this transaction and this project. And I will turn it over to our Chief Real Estate Officer, Zachary Marks, to provide more details.
Thank you, Zachary Marks, Chief Real Estate Officer. Go to the next slide, please. As you all know from the last cycle, we are at the point of actually closing out the original investment period, the original investment structure for MetroPoint. It was originally constructed with 9% tax credits and governmental bonds as sort of the key components of each of the two condominiums, an affordable condominium, affordable LIHTC condominium, and a market rate condominium fully owned by HOC. And this one of the key characteristics of this project is that it was really the reconstruction of the Kiss and Ride in Wheaton. And so it was an engagement with WMATA that actually the conversation around this actually began in 1999. So almost 7 years before it got going. And as part of that, Bozzuto and HOC struck a development agreement in 2003. And that development agreement was a direct obligation between HOC and Bozzuto. And it actually preceded by 3 years the financial closing of the project. And ultimately, as they closed the project, at the time, they were trying to navigate some of the restrictions around development fee associated with LIHTC deals. And so there were changes that were made really between 2006 and 2008 when the building was placed in service. And that also ultimately allocated what was originally one unified construction process. So they started out by building the building as a single project, and then right as it's being placed in service, they allocated it to the two owners that you all are now familiar with. And so you had the low-income housing tax credit investor condominium, and that's the LP interest that you just approved last cycle to buy back. And so really the final engagement to really close out in order for us to move forward with what's next for MetroPoint in terms of its resyndication and recapitalization next year, to really help set right a building that was, born at a really bad time, global financial crisis, and was really always playing catch up for the 15 years of its tax credit investment period. Next slide, please. And you can go to the next slide. That initial 2003 development agreement was for $2.5 million. The number comes from what was the perceived cap on development fee from DHCD, from the state, around tax credit deals. There was at the time a 2.5, the most development fee you could earn on a tax credit deal was $2.5 million. And so that's where that 2.5 was came from in 2003. And so part of that development agreement, the split was 40% to HOC, 60% to Bozzuto. So that created a $1.5 million obligation to Bozzuto. Around the placed in service date for the building, Bozzuto was paid an initial chunk, as both HOC and Bozzuto initially deferred 50% of their fee to make the transaction viable. So Bozzuto was paid its current portion around the placed in service date, but then that remaining $750 was really supposed to be paid through cash flow, but that never happened, of course, because of the way the building, the rents were really reassessed at placed in service. The rents were much lower than the pro forma expected, and it was really an operationally upside down building most years. In more recent years, the building has begun to have some some break even years and things have started to go a little bit better. But obviously, long past the originally projected time. And so Bozzuto's deferred 750 effectively never got paid. Any portion got paid over 15 years. And so in order to close out that engagement so that HOC can can really move forward with MetroPoint without any outstanding obligations, the recommendation here, next slide, please. The recommendation here is to fund from the OHRF $750,000 payment to pay Bozzuto's final installment and really close them out of this transaction so that we can move forward next year without any outstanding obligations related to the original MetroPoint development. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Just very quickly. So this was this was always HOC's obligation. It was not something we assumed from the LIHTC investor.
Correct. Yeah. The development agreement is between HOC and Bozzuto. It was actually struck before the limited partnership agreements were even created. So,
okay. And so basically we're just moving this, the payment of this obligation up. We would have had to pay it eventually, or like?
Yes. So so the 2003 development agreement was never altered, was never changed. So that agreement's in force. And so really for us to move forward on, we don't just want to re-syndicate the LIHTC portion of this deal. We want to, we want the most possible flexibility and when we recapitalize next year of setting this building right, particularly fiscally speaking. And so we want to make sure we have, we don't have anybody else to deal with while we're doing that on either side, either company.
It was good buying the property. It was so cheap.
Just for the record, we'll never do this again, right?
I would say that
strike a development agreement where there's a guarantee.
We don't make such assertions on the record. We definitely don't intend to create a bad deal.
Fair enough.
Yeah, this is, that.
When you say not do it again, what are you referring to?
I understand that the 750 is ironclad, right? It's a legal obligation of HOC on a development deal where they didn't have risk on that 750. And it's an obligation of HOC. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, it was a more of a pure play development services agreement where basically there was a negotiation to pay Bozzuto for their services. Bozzuto wasn't taking any risk associated with the deal. So since the Lindley, we've gone in a different direction in terms of having a lot more aligned incentives.
So just like our prior discussion, goals aren't to replicate this model again between risk and return.
We definitely find it's very helpful to align incentives, to share risk and to share success.
I agree with your comment about never, but your intentions moving forward are not to replicate this model.
Right. And I would say, given that we just talked about the development services pool, a firm coming out of that pool might be in a development services role. But I think to your point, when we go to craft that, you'll see something probably similar. If somebody's coming out of that pool, it's not going to be a venture partner. It's going to be somebody coming out to just provide development or financing services. But to your point, we want to align payment with the performance of the project. And there was definitely not any integration about like, if this project goes badly, is there anything held back for the project working out? So,
and Bozzuto's not in the ownership at all.
Correct.
Was that 2003 development agreement the original development agreement?
I'm pretty sure.
I think, again, I'm going back in history, and you talk about ownership. The original deal, Bozzuto was going to be part owner.
Yes, I think you're
and
right.
then it was renegotiated that they were just going to be the developer.
Yep.
And I think, in fact, that's what drove the commitment to the 750 to the developer fee. Is that?
Yes, and then we're also. Oh, sorry, please.
So that's why I asked the question about the original development agreement or contract. I thought there was another one.
There was between LaMotta and Bozzuto. you're correct, that there was originally that agreement, and it's clear from the notes from the team back then that you're right, that originally it was supposed to be, there was supposed to be joint participation, and then HOC wound up paying certain fees when that changed to move Bozzuto out of the position.
One of the things that I think could be useful for at least commissioners is one day to have a session to discuss sort of the experience that HOC has had with these different kinds of relationships and why they did and didn't work, and how we might improve if we can. Because in fact, we have graduated. We went from that to the Lindley and to others. And I think just for the historical perspective, it's useful for the commissioners to understand that and just to figure out whether it means anything in the future. The other question that I have is, I'm not sure I fully understood. How we go down, our number go down to 359?
So the balance was, all right, so originally in 2006, when the building closed, it was actually built under a single contract. And so what they discovered is that the 2.5 during somewhere in there, that the $2.5 million development fee cap only applied to tax credit deals. And when they thought about it again, they said, oh, well, we actually have two deals here. We have the tax credit deal, market rate deal. So we can actually charge development fee to the market rate side that is not governed by DHCA's $2.5 million cap. So what you see in that check down is HOC's fee goes down within the original $2.5 million fee, but there is technically a significant amount of unpaid development fee attached to the market rate condo that belongs to HOC. So that's where the rest of it is. It actually, their fee, HOC's fee actually went up, but unfortunately, it became allocated. A portion of it became allocated to the market rate. I
see. Okay. And is the $750,000 that you want to get from the OHRF, is that on the list for already predicted to come from that, or is this new?
I think this will be newly added, but I believe so. I don't think it's in the one that came with the quarterly report.
Right. No, it's not, but there is cover, and we can, of course, answer questions at the upcoming board meeting in regards to that.
Do you know offhand how much we've funded in operating deficits between the two jobs, or an aggregate roughly?
I don't. I did go back through and look at, I mainly focused on the LP side, but certainly something we could work with budget office on and try to figure out. But it's the LP side was actually not the particularly, there were negative years for the LP side, but they weren't like terrible. It was really the market rate side that had the significant ones. So if that's something that,
so having all the accrued fees really deferred fee doesn't really make any difference.
Correct.
It could be zero for all.
I mean, there's probably some way in which to use it as leverage in sort of the recapitalization, but it's not something that's going to get paid from the deal.
And the recapitalization will be both sides?
We want to maximize our flexibility. There are definitely tools that exist today that did not exist then, that we could go look at the building and not necessarily do exactly the same thing from. So just as an example, like you've seen on Hillendale Gateway with income averaging, you're able to do a whole heck of a lot more in terms of providing 30% units and 80% units, everything between. So particularly on an existing building like this, given where market rate rents are in Wheaton, there could be an opportunity to generate more equity without necessarily, wildly changing the building. What could also be an opportunity to deliver units at lower AMIs. So there are more tools we have that would potentially have us look at the building and slice it in a different way.
So since you mentioned the value today versus 15, 18, whatever years ago, what do you think of the value of the market rate? And is the credit side a 30-year lure or 15? It's probably 30.
I think it's actually.
Okay.
Yeah, because they were 9s. So I think there's an existing 25.
So what do you think the value is in the market of the market rate roughly? Or you rather talk about that?
It's difficult because, buyer asks for trouble. But, I do think that there's, it's a good building and a good location. And now that we're finally free of the original structure, I do think, we bring a lot of refinance and capitalization to it that we didn't have at the time. It's also now an existing building, not just the construction. So I think, there are definitely some tools and tactics that we can bring to this building that will.
It'd be interesting for me, maybe other commissioners, to know if we sold both sides, kept low income, obviously has to stay low income. You said 40 years extended compliance, got a development partner who would do the right work, what it would sell for if we marketed it, and same with the market rate side. Just as an alternative to understand what's out there economically. Again, I've mentioned this before, our strategic plan does mention finding new resources, and it'd be worth at least knowing before we decide to go down a specific route, just so for our own edification. I'm sorry.
I'll jump in.
Yep.
I think in terms of next steps, of course, our team is going to explore what options we would advance to the board in terms of how to best leverage the resource. If we get instructed from the board as a whole to take the next steps in terms of going forward with a formal appraisal process or retaining a broker to determine what the asset would sell for, that's an instruction that I would appreciate to come from the full board so that we can ensure that that's the direction we should go, and the resources, so that we expend our resources how the board would want us to, of course. But on our end, of course, we're going to do our due diligence analysis, think through structures based on an assumption of wanting to leverage as much as we can from this asset and recapitalize it in a way that allows it to remain in our portfolio as we have in terms of our policy and our position in regards to how we've managed our larger assets, especially near transportation, et cetera. And so I've heard the recommendation come from you, Commissioner Solomon. I think, of course, along with the rest of the colleagues, if that's the instruction of staff, we will definitely take that instruction. I just want to be clear that it involves some concrete next steps as well as investment that I would think we'd want to make sure that's the direction the board would like us to take.
Fair enough. I wasn't making a motion. I was making a suggestion, but if that's something the commission as a whole wants to do, that'd be fine. There's also a lot of ways of thinking about keeping it in our portfolio. We could be a minority partner with someone else. It'd be worth exploring different options just to see before we decide on a resyndication where we're the sole sponsor. But I appreciate your comments, President Andrews.
I know you've raised that question, but I think that, and I agree with you that it's a decision of the full board, but I think, or I assume, the full board would want to know what the discussion and or recommendation was of the Development Finance Committee. So I do think that if this is an issue on any one development or generally, we need to have some proposal developed here within the committee to have a fuller discussion and forward to the full commission.
Do we do that now, or when's our next meeting?
Well, I wonder if we can get a motion on this particular item, and then if the committee so desires, I don't know if you want to agendize this or have further discussion, but maybe to close out this particular item and motion
We could certainly do
in
that.
regards to this thing.
I mean, I think you have raised it as part of the strategic plan discussions, and so it might be.
But just when Zach mentioned,
Yeah.
what the value is in the market, and we've raised this a few times in the briefing materials that we are resyndicating with sponsor, it seems like something that's worthy of quite. I understand today's agenda is not this item, but the materials do say what they say. And I don't know, I won't speak for other commissioners. I don't see the downside in getting the value of the property. But we can certainly take the matter at hand right now. And I take the point of, does it just go to the commission as a whole, or do we do it here first? But go ahead.
Yeah, I think typically it would start at the committee, and and I think it would be fine to have a discussion at this level, maybe at a different meeting.
Sure.
So,
but as long as we If we do that, that sounds great.
Yeah.
You want to start the?
Yeah. Are there any additional questions on the recommendation at hand? No. Okay, if not, then can I get a motion to support the staff's recommendation and send the item to the full commission for consideration? Motion.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. The motion carries and is
Can I-
approved.
One thing I will say though is I'm voting for it to send it to the full commission, but if we don't have the information on the OHRF on this and the prior item, I will vote against them in the full commission, which I've said before.
Understood, and I intend to follow up with
Okay.
you to find out exactly what you need to see there, because we do produce some things I'd like to get further clarification.
The final item on our agenda is the approval of a new or at least under a new name, participating lender for the single family mortgage purchase program. President Andrews.
Thank you, commissioners. This is one of our standing matters that comes before this committee in regards to enhancing the number of participants that are involved in lending for our single family mortgage purchase program. I will turn it over to Monty Stanford, the Director of Mortgage Finance, along with Paulette Dudley, Program Specialist, to provide additional information.
Thank you, Executive Director Andrews. Good morning again, commissioners. I think Executive Director Andrews has said it all, so I will turn it over to Paulette Dudley to talk about our new lender.
Yes, good morning. How's everybody? Good. For the record, my name is Paulette Dudley, Program Specialist for the Mortgage Finance Single Family Office. And I come to you once again for the approval of a new participating lender for the Single Family Mortgage Purchase Program. The Single Family and HOC has approved continuous new lender participation for our mortgage purchase program. And over the years, we've approved close to 36 lenders, but through non-participation and lenders dropping out, we have about 26 new lenders that are in our program. Of that 26, about 17 are really very active in our program. And as a sidebar, since last year and up to the present, we've come to you to put in 10 lenders for our program that have now come as participating lenders. So we've been to you and the lenders are very interested in being a part of our program. The criteria for lender participation is that a lender is not a mortgage broker and can close loans in their own name. The lender is approved to do business with Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, and also that they are FHA originating lenders. The new lenders are also required to be approved by the U.S. Bank, who is our master servicer for our mortgage-backed securities. And only approved lenders, and why they're so interested in our program, is that they have access to our county revolving closing cost program and also other special closing cost programs. To date, we have a program that's called McHalf that allows a borrower to get up to $25,000. So the lenders are very interested in getting their applicants into the HOC program. New Res, who is the new lender, has applied for participation in the mortgage purchase program, and they do meet the criteria for that. Specifically, New Res was founded back in 2008, and is licensed to lend in 50 states. New Res acquired the assets and staff from Caliber Home Loans, who was an active participant with HOC since 2015 and has done quite a bit of business with us. But while the name has changed from Caliber to New Res, the staff has not, and they are absolutely eager to get approval so that they can continue to originate loans through our program. they have offices in Rockville, Greenbelt, Pikesville, Columbia, Maryland. And they originate various lending channels as well. Excuse me, New Res also participates in the tax exempt bond programs with Virginia VHDA, also Maryland CDA program, HOC because Caliber, it was a participating lender, and also with the Washington DC DC HFA, and also with Florida. They do meet the minimum, the median income limit levels. We had discussion about that at some point to make sure that these lenders are originating loans in all various levels, moderate, low to higher income. And that is also in our packet here. So that's showing percentages as well. I believe that is it as far as their things are concerned. We do recommend that the DEFIN committee join staff in recommending that the New Res LLC become a participating lender with our program.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? If not, can I get a motion to support the staff's recommendation?
Second.
All in favor? Aye, the motion is approved and will be sent to the full commission for consideration.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was the final item on our agenda today. Are there any other issues for discussion at this time? If not, I will make a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Yeah. This committee is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners.